All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fermented Fiction. Thanks for tuning in this month for our featured Author of the Month interview. This month we have Travis Baldree, author of Legends and Lattes and creator of many other creative endeavors, I believe in the video game world, right?
Yeah, 20 years making video games.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being here with us, Travis.
Thanks a ton for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So here at Fermented Fiction, we just want to get into the meat of it. We're not going to... Yeah, there we go. There's a little Legends and Lattes book for everybody. Here it is. That's what it looks like. And if you haven't read it yet, you're really missing out. The inside of it looks like this. Isn't that neat?
It has words.
It's words. It's also paper as well. There's some... Yeah.
Really cutting edge stuff.
Sorry.
Really cutting edge stuff.
Sorry. Travis is breaking the mold over here. But you actually are Travis breaking the mold, and I'd like to start off talking about that. Why did you choose to write what I've been hearing is called cozy fantasy, or I believe you said low stakes fantasy?
Yeah.
Was your term for it? Do you think that was something the genre was lacking, something the genre was missing, or did you just kind of do it for fun? What inspired that choice, and how did you pull it off? 'Cause
Okay.
you did.
Okay, I'll break that down into a couple different questions. I think as a genre, it already kind of existed, and I think that people just hadn't put that name to it yet. I think if you look at like Hayao Miyazaki's movies, if you look at things like My Neighbor Totoro or Howl's Moving Castle, and things like the actual book Howl's Moving Castle, T. Kingfisher, The Paladin's Grace, Sword Heart, they have a lot of those kind of elements of cozy fantasy. I think it all exists out there. Honestly, I think Terry Pratchett and Discworld is probably like the biggest example of cozy fantasy. I just don't think people put that name to it, but it's effectively like about people and their normal concerns and, relationships and just kind of almost mundane things, but seen through a lens of, a little bit more of a magical world.
Right.
I wasn't thinking about any of that when I wrote this book, so I certainly am not like pioneering anything. I think I just happened to get attached to that name. So I'm an audiobook narrator by trade. That's what I normally do. That's what I do day in and day out these days. And I read a lot of action-adventure fantasy fiction, and you kind of get pretty quickly typecast as a narrator because people see you reading one kind of thing, and if they write a book like that, they want you to narrate it.
Right.
And I don't get to narrate anything like this. I really like cozy mysteries. I like fantasy romance and stuff because they're like these really comforting sort of chicken noodle soup kind of books to read. You feel good after you read them. So in the run up to Nano, I was joking around in my Discord where I do my narration work live. And I said what I really wanted to read was a Hallmark movie set in the Forgotten Realms. And I was joking and I said, yeah, the dwarf businesswoman, she goes home to her dad's mine and it's failing and she has to rescue it. And there's probably a really ruggedly handsome guy who makes cookies or something and there are sweaters and it's just all very, very nice. That's not what I wrote, but that's kind of was the genesis of the idea.
Okay.
So when it came time to write it, I wrote something that was like a little more personally relatable to me, but still in that kind of same vein.
Okay. And so coffee is pretty important to you in your life?
Absolutely, absolutely. But at the time I was writing this, which was for National Novel Writing Month last year, we're in Nano right now, I was really missing going to a coffee shop because, it's the height of COVID, nobody's going to them at all. And so the idea of sitting in a place like that and seeing people face to face and having a nice cup of coffee was basically escapist fantasy.
Okay, awesome. I mean, that makes sense. I think that's a thing. A book like this, I think, is a thing that a lot of people needed after the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I do love that it shows the life of like regular people in a very irregular world in terms of it's fantastical and magical and all that stuff exists. Like your protagonist is a former hero who used to kill like dragons or whatever, And I think that was awesome to show that glimpse into the normal life of the city. You often get those glimpses in like higher stakes fantasies.
Yeah.
But you don't ever get to like really live in those worlds. And anytime you do, I think it adds tremendous value to the story. So this is a great example of how you can make an entire story out of somebody opening a business. You know, that's a monumental undertaking. It doesn't matter what world you're in. If you're going to run a successful business, it's tough to do. And I think you did a great job of taking a story that seems like, I don't want to say mundane, but seems very regular, you know?
It is mundane, in a lot of ways. It's just that I think part of the point of it is that mundane doesn't have to mean meaningless or unimportant.
Right.
It's just, and that's part of, I think, what's nice about setting it in a fantasy world is that it's a way of reminding you that just everyday things are still important and are still worth talking about and can be enjoyable and interesting. It doesn't have to be dull as dishwater.
Absolutely. I mean, I've always had a bit of a problem with people who they act like working in a bar, working in a restaurant is somebody without ambition or something. Like I've seen that portrayal cast upon people who work in your average everyday work jobs, right?
Absolutely.
But like, do you like going to the bar? Yeah. Do you like eating at restaurants? Well, somebody has to work there, dude.
Yeah,
like somebody has
and it's
to
a worthy life, and it's a worthy choice.
Yes, absolutely. And this book does a great job of illustrating that. So good work. On the note of being a narrator, I wanted to ask specifically, this is my biggest question for you. How does audiobook narration play into your writing style, your development of your prose, your characters, your world? Because as I actually listened to your book. I listened to you read it. So I think that I would recommend that very highly. Travis is an awesome narrator. He read his own book, and it's really, really well done. I would recommend that if you're a listener. But how is that your profession as a narrator informed your ability to write? Because this is your first published novel, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And I tried to write one many times before, also during National Novel Writing Month. All failures, got stuck in the middle. Really common problem, I think. This is the first time, obviously, that I finished. It's also the first time that I outlined.
Oh, okay.
I thought I was a pantser. Sadly, I am not. I'm still a little busted up about it. But as far as narration and how it influenced the way I write, it definitely did, and it did it a lot. And it's really easy for me to see if I look at anything that I wrote prior to narrating a lot. When you're reading stuff out loud, and you and I were talking about this, people are always advised to read their work out loud because you'll find so many things that you notice or you want to change or that are fundamentally wrong just from the act of reading it aloud, because you can't skim it. You have to fully experience it and deliver it, and every word matters. Doing that for hundreds of other people's books of varying degrees of quality and style really rapidly tells you at the very least what you like and what you don't like. And I think some of those are probably good general rules, but then you kind of get into the weeds of things that are a little bit more personal. Like, I really like single POV stories, and I discovered that as I'm reading other people's books out loud. I really dislike needless world building. So as soon as somebody starts telling me about the rugs and the cutlery and I'm out.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't mind writing that stuff when I was just writing. But when I had to read it aloud, it's like you can feel the energy just bleed out of the read. And when you start to have to struggle to like maintain attention and to maintain that like narrative momentum, it makes those things really, really clear to you. So it's almost like going to like a writing workshop where everybody's reading their work out loud and you're noticing what you think about what other people are doing. Because it's not your words, but it's still super, super valuable.
Right.
So it was huge for me.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, I feel like it's evident. The conversations in your book particularly stood out to me. They seem very organic and very natural. And I can tell they were written by somebody who has to read dialogue.
To read dialogue a lot. And I think this is probably useful for anybody. If you read aloud to your kids, if you're reading aloud your own work, if you read aloud other work, even in part, there's something that gets rewired in your brain that starts to think about things in like audible terms. So basically when I'm writing at this point, I'm almost reading it out loud in my head while I'm writing, which I find really useful. It's hard to describe, but there is some little switch that got flipped at some point. Maybe it's just getting comfortable with your own voice saying words, but you can suddenly start to hear yourself.
Interesting. So like during your writing process, can you give us like an example of when you noticed that happening?
I don't know if I can describe it apart from the fact that I can hear my voice in my own head while I'm writing, and so I have like this running audio track of what the words would sound like while I'm putting them down, like the cadence of the sentence, how long it's gone on, where the pause is going to be. It's got a weird like audio accompaniment. It's really hard to describe, but because I think everybody thinks differently, but
Right.
it's it's super useful.
Absolutely. I mean, I always read my own stuff out loud. That's like my third pass, right?
Yeah.
Once I feel pretty good about reading it myself, I'm like, okay, I'm try reading it out. I always catch just a ton of things that I never noticed when I was just reading, right? So like, has that happened to you quite a few times where you've got like an audiobook that you're putting this audiobook out there to the world. It's your job at this point. And you catch a whole bunch of stuff. Does that happen to you often?
Yeah. Books come to me in various degrees of editorial completion, let's say. Some of them are really polished, and it's obvious that the author probably did read it out loud or is just really excellent and clean. Like an editor can only do so much, especially for a lot of indie stuff. They usually only get like one editing pass and one copy edit pass, and having more than one goes a long way.